In the middle of the Atlantic Ocean lies the small Portuguese island called Madeira. Located 500 kilometers off the coast of northern Africa, and despite its relatively small size of only 55 kilometers long and 20 kilometers wide, surprisingly, it is home to an incredible variety of terrain, from tall sea cliffs at the coast to steep jagged peaks with lush forest protected by UNESCO, tunnels, waterfalls, and hundreds of kilometers of trails. And I found out that there was a trail that goes across the entire island, starting at sea level on the western shores, hiking along the central mountainous spine through its highest peaks, and ending back at the ocean on the other side of the island. An adventure spanning over 160 kilometers and 6 days of hiking. But with the island being in the middle of the ocean, influenced by the Gulf Stream, the weather here can be unpredictable, with strong winds and heavy rainfall, and when you add to that steep mountainous terrain, that meant that there will be some challenges ahead of me.
Okay, I see it.
But more on that later. For now, let's start from the very beginning. Landing on the island, I took a bus to the main city of Funchal, where around half of the population of Madeira lives. I walked through the city and the downtown area, where a colorful flower festival was happening with traditional folk dancing. Around noon I got to the bus station, but I had already missed the bus that goes to the other part of the island where the trail starts. But I took another bus which would take me about a third of the way there. It was actually quite a scenic ride, seeing how the locals managed to use such steep terrain and have vineyards and banana plantations. I made it to Ribeira Brava and got to try the locally grown bananas. Then I walked to the outskirts of the town, and after 2 hitchhike rides, I was at the northern shores, from where I got on another hitchhike ride, where we stopped by this waterfall and then made it to Porto Moniz. In here they had these pools in the rocks, so I jumped in for a quick dip. The evening was already approaching, but I had the option to hike for a few kilometers to a campground in the next valley. So I walked the steep roads, climbing above the town. Higher up I came to the first Levada, which in Portuguese means to carry, carrying water for agriculture, power and drinking. I was then descending a steep slope, passing by a variety of plantations. I then made it to the little village with the campground and these cliff formations by the beach. Around sunset I came to the campground and set up camp, ready to start my first real day of hiking across Madeira. I left the campground and started hiking out of the valley on the steep village roads. Here the roads were so steep that they even had stairs in the middle of the smaller roads. And here might be a good time to mention how I discovered about this trail. I heard that there is a famous 115-kilometer ultramarathon that goes across the island, and I thought, why not try to hike it? And as I wasn't on a strict schedule and there are so many trails on the island, I ended up adding a few extra alternate trails and places to see. After some climbing on the roads, I was then entering the trail, and I was faced with a drastic contrast, from civilization to a lush green, jungle-like experience. The high humidity and subtropical climate creates the perfect environment for an abundant plant life.
With all the flowing water and all these plants, it smells so fresh.
I crossed the road and then again immediately entered the protected Lorry Silver Forest. Here I was again hiking by a Levada, and it turns out that Madeira Island has over 1,500 kilometers of these aqueducts which the first settlers started building all the way back in the 16th century. Hiking along the Levadas would provide a nice change of pace from hiking up and down the steep slopes on the island.
I don't know who decided to make a trail through this area, but it's pretty amazing.
I then made it to another road and noticed that there were a lot more cars here, as there was a famous and easily accessible area with centuries-old Fanal forest. I checked out the viewpoint in the area and continued further, where the trail was again more quiet. Around here, instead of following the ultramarathon course to a nearby town, I was taking an alternate route to check out one waterfall.
So we have about 300 meters of descending for next 1 kilometer, after we've already done 24 kilometers, and then some more ascending afterwards. So it's gonna be interesting. Let's go.
I made it to the 30-meter waterfall, and even though it's a popular place to visit, at that time of the day there was nearly no one there. Now I had another climb to get back to the main trail, and nearing the top, the clouds got darker and light rain started to fall. As the sunset was approaching, I was up on the higher plateau and heading to my designated campsite. Before starting this trip, I was considering if I should bring the puffy jacket. I thought, it's Madeira, it should be hot. But in the early morning, I was happy that I had decided to pack my jacket. The first few hours of the day, I would be hiking along the southern slopes, and apparently there is a clear variation in the climate. Here it was drier and without the same lush forests. I was hiking along the Levada, and I noticed the fast-moving clouds slightly higher up.
Hello, buddy.
I then had a few kilometers hiking on this mountainous plateau, which was providing the perfect opportunity to cultivate those natural forces with plenty of windmills. And even though I kept moving on, only around noon it started warming up enough to take off the warm jacket. From here I was again leaving the roads and entering back the trails on the northern slopes.
Yesterday on the descent towards the end of the day, I noticed some knee pain, and now on the downhills I definitely noticed some pain. I hope it's gonna be good in no time. Might need some more rest, but yeah, it doesn't feel so good.
The track that I had on my phone was following this hidden unmarked trail, cutting a shortcut to a lower trail. On the map it did seem pretty steep, but I decided to follow it. The trail got progressively more technical, and if you're watching and thinking about doing that, proceed with caution or consider following one of the two other trails. They had installed these metal ropes to help with going up and down the trail, and it got a little more exposed, and unfortunately to free up my hands, I dropped my trekking pole down, but it bounced off the rock and got stuck on a tree near the cliffs. So to retrieve back the pole, I got into a little bonus adventure.
Okay, I see it. Now let's try to go back safely to the trail. Oh yeah.
I also had a random encounter with a few people going the wrong way.
I'm surprised to see other people on this trail here.
We're surprised to be here. We probably should have went back.
Yeah.
But did you come from the other side?
From up here, yeah.
Is it almost done?
After a few more technical sections, the trail again became more mellow, and eventually I made it back down to the marked trail.
Good to be back on the regular trail.
I was then passing by this short panoramic ridge with views to the mountains as well as the ocean to the north. From here the trail was again going down steeply until it came down to another levada. And now instead of going up, down or around the mountain, the trail was passing straight through it with a few long tunnels, one of them being nearly 1 kilometer long.
A little bit narrow over here.
Coming out of the second tunnel, I could see the bigger mountains where I was heading to in the upcoming days. Eventually I made it to the Encumeada pass and stopped for dinner after a pretty strenuous day. After dinner I continued to the Encumeada hotel, where I would spend the night, take a warm shower, wash my clothes and charge my devices. After the last 2 days of hiking, combined with me doing my very first ultramarathon just 10 days prior, it led to me having some IT bend issues and sharp pain when I tried to bend my knees. So I decided to take an extra day off to allow my body to heal and recover. So I went and bought groceries for the next few days, ate some fruit and researched about how I could recover from this pain faster. The next morning I still wasn't fully recovered, but I decided to try to keep moving and see if movement would help. The pain was still noticeable, but the beautiful views were also helping with keeping me distracted and moving forward. Eventually I got out of the forest and kept traversing the slopes towards the pass. While hiking, I noticed that Pico Grande, where I was heading to later in the day, was starting to get absorbed in the clouds.
Thankfully the trail today has been pretty mellow, not bothering my knee so much. It was worse in the morning compared to how it is now. The view should be coming right up here. Oh wow.
Coming to the pass, I was welcomed with a panoramic view to Madeira's tallest peaks. From here there was a steeper side trail to Pico Grande, there was a 2.5 kilometers out and back, and I decided to hike to the peak. Lower down there was still visibility towards the valley, but as I kept hiking up, the mountain was becoming more and more absorbed in the clouds. I made it to the peak, and together with a few other hikers, we waited for the clouds to clear up, but after an hour of waiting, I decided to start heading back down. There was a steeper descent ahead of me. I have to descend all the way down to the valley. But thankfully from the movement, my knee was now feeling better and hiking was again more enjoyable. Soon I was down in the next valley, surrounded by the cliffs of the massive peaks. I was then on the lookout for a place to set up camp, but passing by the river, I couldn't miss the chance and stopped by to cool off.
Always worth it.
Towards the end of the day and around sunset, I found a nice flat spot to set up my tent for the night. I woke up before the sunrise, and being in the middle of the ocean and camping on a grassy field, my tent was covered with a marine dew. I packed up and started heading out towards Madeira's highest peaks. On the way to the high ridge, I was again passing underneath these massive trees. Further up, I was greeted by the first sun rays and a view to the jagged peaks where I was heading to. The trail kept climbing up until I made it above the forest and to the main ridge overlooking the ocean both to the north and south.
We have water over there and we have water over there. That's a pretty cool ridge.
I kept following the trail along the panoramic ridge, going through both the shady and the sunny side, with Pico Ruivo slowly starting to appear closer and closer. Eventually, I made it to the trail right below Madeira's tallest peak, which was a pretty popular place, and for a reason. From here we could see Pico Grande and the high plateaus I came from, but also far in the distance and absorbed in the fog, I could also barely see the peninsula where the trail and the island ends. But to get there, I still had a few days ahead of me. I started heading back down and filled up on water at the mountain hut below the peak, as I had a warm and exposed, dry section ahead. I was again on a somewhat popular trail, but this whole next section is a demonstration of both the hard labor and creativity of the locals to blaze a trail through such terrain. There were stairs, protective railings, and even tunnels in these rocky cliffs. The clouds started to gather around the mountain tops, and Pico Areeiro was visible with the big white building of a round radar on the top. At the top of Pico Areeiro, I stopped for a quick break and got a soup with a traditional local bread. Then from here, as soon as I got back on the trail, the crowds disappeared and I continued hiking down the colorful hills. In this flatter area, they had a European project recovering the high altitude vegetation. In the end, I made it to the campground that I had previously reserved, but unfortunately I found out that there was no water here. But luckily there was a nearby restaurant that was still open, and I asked them to fill up my bottle so I could make dinner for the night. I woke up with the sounds of the birds and slowly started packing up. As I had set up my tent under the trees, my tent was completely dry. Even though initially my plan was to camp on the grass, but over there was morning dew, so I was glad I remembered to move and avoid having to dry up my tent in the morning. Before starting to hike, I will also do a few exercises and stretches to help with the knee pain, which by now was almost gone. Then it was time to head back on the trail.
Taking it easy here in the early morning as the body still tries to wake up. The tough trail is behind us, so no rush.
The big mountains were now behind, and I was having a much more mellow day, getting closer and closer to the ocean.
When you see a little trash like that, it doesn't take much to take with your own trash, and it's not gonna make your gear much heavier, but it's gonna make the trail much nicer.
I was passing by a small village and stopped for a late breakfast, and then went on a short and popular side trail to a lookout of the high peaks. Coming back to the village, I then continued again on a quiet trail next to the Levada. Passing by a natural waterfall, I ran into a group of hikers and I joined them for a little chat, and then also jumped in for a refreshing dip. Further out, I saw that the trail seemed to be closed, but I could also hear the workers not far from the closure. There had been a rock slide that destroyed part of the trail, but with my broken Spanish and English, I convinced them to pass through while holding onto the protective railing in the middle of the cliffs. I chatted a bit with another worker that spoke good English and then continued along. Getting that close to the water was a pretty satisfying experience, with a beautiful view of the valley and the ocean. Passing by another restaurant, I couldn't miss the chance and got another warm meal. I ate one pizza, and when I got out, all of a sudden, the island was again getting absorbed in the clouds. Even though I don't have a massive knowledge about plants, one cannot not be impressed by the wide variety of plant life in Madeira.
And now from here starts the last bigger descent for this trail, and then we'll be closer to the coast. Let's go. I don't know here if I'm hearing the ocean or if that's the sound of the wind, but it might be the ocean. Now we can definitely say it's the ocean.
I kept descending down until I made it out of the forest just on time for the sunset above the cliffs. As I was surrounded by steep terrain, I ended up setting my tent on the side of a quiet and dead-end dirt road. And because the surface was hard-packed and I couldn't put my stakes in the ground, I used bigger rocks to add tension to be able to pitch my tent. Around sunrise, I was up again, and even though it looked like clear weather above the mountains, out in the ocean, darker clouds seemed to be gathering and preparing to roam inland. I packed my gear one last time for this trip, and then I filled up my water bottles as there was a long and dry stretch. And before you know it, the rainy clouds had already arrived over the island. The trail today was mostly going to stay right next to the water, traversing the cliffs on the way to the end of the peninsula.
The other hikers yesterday were telling me how beautiful this section is. Well, let's see if it clears up. Instead of slowing down, the rain actually increased some more.
At this junction is where the ultramarathon course descends down into the city of Machico, but my plan was to hike further to a scenic ending at the eastern tip of Madeira. Occasionally I would again pass by the dense forest and then hike through more exposed areas with the winds blowing strongly up the cliffs. The rain kept pouring down, but also the little town was starting to appear through the clouds. Eventually, I made it completely soaked from the rain at the town that's closest to the end of the peninsula, and even though the forecast was for the rain to have already stopped by noon, it seemed like there were no signs of stopping. Without any visibility, I was seriously considering ending the trip there.
It's been raining pretty much non-stop. The forecast didn't come as it was supposed to.
But I decided to stop by a restaurant and put on dry clothes, get some warm food, and wait to see if it will clear up. I then used a bunch of napkins to try to dry out my shirt, but it was still wet. Though luckily, the rain had stopped, so I decided to go see the final part of the trail. The clouds were even starting to open up, allowing for the sun to start shining through. The taller mountains were now far in the back, and I kept moving forward to the narrowing peninsula.
I'm definitely glad that I decided to continue and check this final part out. Even though I was cold and miserable, with the sun everything dried out pretty fast, and the views, they can speak for themselves.
The majority of the people hiking in this area come with cars to a parking lot lower down, but as I was coming by foot, I was hiking on a quiet trail. Soon I was on the main and busier trail, taking us to the final viewpoint. There was the final climb, and then after hiking across the island, I made it to the place where this trail ends with views to the open ocean. And now there was still one thing left to do.